I always enjoy putting a piece of wood on the lathe and thinking about how it's going to turn out, making decisions as to what will be the top, what will be the bottom. This piece was a beautiful piece of wood and I had some decisions to make. Stay tuned, leave a comment, let me know if you think I made the right decisions. I think it turned out to be one of the prettiest bowls I've ever turned. Let's talk about this piece. It's a cherry burl. It's a commission piece. The gentleman that gave me this wants me to turn it for him. And he's been kind to me and supplies me with some wood, so I'll gladly do this in return. So again, it is a cherry burl. I love cherry burls. It's relatively dry, so I should be able to turn it start to finish. But it's interesting what I'm going to do with this. First of all, the bark is some of the nicest looking bark I've seen. It's very unique in the texture of it. But there's some issues with it. With any time I turn a bowl, I have a decision to make. Is this going to be the top of the bowl or the bottom? Am I going to save the bark? Am I not going to save the bark? I mean, saving the bark is only an option if I make this the top. And I think that's what I'll do, but I'm seeing some other issues. This here is deep. There's a hole here. So the rim will be discontinuous. It'll be high here, low over here. I'm probably only going to be able to make it 10 or so inches. Because my other option would be to make this the top and get rid of all the bark altogether. Or at least turn the bottom up and just leave the bark as a rim around here. That is a good option. I love the pattern here that I have in the wood. I'm afraid if this is the bottom, I don't know how deep this coloration and pattern will go, and I may turn it away. But what that would mean if I made this the top would be the bark would be on the edge, like on the edge of a rim. And I've done that in the last few projects, so I think I'm going to make this the bottom, make this the top, and try and save the bark. Now, I don't know, the bark seems good and tight, so hopefully I'll be able to save it. So the first thing I'm going to do is mount it between centers, get a flat spot here turned so that I can get it mounted up, and then we'll start working on it. Okay, I've got it mounted up and it's pretty straight. I'm watching this cut surface here. It's pretty good. Not perfect, but that's going to be the bottom anyway, so that's going to be turned away, but it's pretty good. I did have to drill here on the top a flat surface because of that bark. It was so uneven. As I tightened up my tailstock, it would push the whole thing to one side or the other. But it's pretty good now, and I can get pretty good speed out of it. I'm at 400 RPM, 500 RPM, and that's going to be great to start with. So normally you want to start at the bottom and work up so that when you're cutting, it's what's called a supported cut. In other words, if there's any end grain, where there's end grain, as I cut up, there'll be fibers behind it to hold it in place so they don't fray. But the problem with that is on this rim here, it will cause me to push the bark off. So actually on the top, I want to start working my way down so that I'm pushing the bark on rather than pushing it off. So I'm going to try and determine the largest diameter that I can get, establish that rim, and then we'll work on the bottom up. Okay, I think that's the outer limit to the diameter. So it's going to be 12 inches in diameter or so. So I'm going to start establishing that outer rim at this point. I'm using my carbide tool. It allows me to push straight in, and I'm also using the reference line I put on my tool rest because I know that's where I wanted the maximum diameter to be. The carbide tool works well in this case because it does allow me to push straight in and therefore push directly down onto the bark. Now, I can't really tell, but I could hear bark coming off. Hopefully that's bark outside of where my rim is going to be, and that this is still good. So far it looks all right. I'm going to keep on going, and I may as well just make it a cylindrical shape right down from this point, and then I can see what I'm dealing with. Now, I did a little bit of work off camera. I mounted a faceplate on the top, which I normally do, and turned my tenon on the bottom so I can flip it around. Started curving the bottom of this. So now you can kind of see the shape of this rim. It's going to be pretty curvy. But I want to maintain this bark. Some of it is pretty good. Some of it is a little bit loose. So I'm going to put some glue on that just to firm it up. I'm going to take this just a bit smaller yet. And but before I do too much more work, I'm going to get some glue on that bark so that I don't lose it. And then once I'm done that, I'll flip it around and work on the inside. It looks like I've lost a little piece of bark there. I may try and find it. I'm not sure if I'll be able to or not. I'm happier with that shape. I think I'll be able to start working the inside of that now and come out to that edge. Now I'd like to go a little thinner with this bowl, but if I do, I'm going to lose some of that character in the bark. I think I'm going to have to leave it a bit thicker just to see it, but we'll see when we turn it around. So I'm done shaping the outside now, so I'll use my negative rake scraper, and I've been using it a bit. You can see here the shavings that are on my scraper. The idea here is just to get rid of any tool marks that were left behind from the bowl gouge itself. I'm also cleaning up that rim on the bottom where the foot is going to be. But you can see the very fine shavings that come off here. Now I'm just sanding around that foot, again wanting to maintain a nice crisp joint between the bowl and the foot. Power sanding as usual. I'll only show the beginning of it. I start with 80 grit, work my way up to 600. On the bark, there was a few areas that I did have to hand sand with the power sander, but with the lathe stopped, just to clean them up a little bit. They curled in a bit, so rather than take the whole bowl down, I just sanded it a bit with the power sander with the lathe stopped. One of my favorite times, starting to put the tung oil on the outside of the bowl. Cherry really picks up a nice color, a nice shade, especially with tung oil. You can start to see here now the real beauty of the wood coming out. So I have it flipped around, and here's the dilemma. I'd like it to be thin, but if I go too thin, it just makes it more difficult to keep the bark on. If I left it an inch thick, no problem, that bark would all stay on. But if I go super thin, some of this bark is not going to want to stay on. So it's going to be a balancing act, but what I can do is start working the outside of the rim and slowly work in until we figure a good compromise. I don't know if you saw that or not, but I just lost all of that. So this piece here came off. Not a surprise really, although no, it is a surprise. That layer there broke, but I can glue that back on, and I will. And then we will continue to turn that and see what we can, where we can save. I also see I've lost a piece out of there. I think I saw that come underneath here. Here it is here. So I'm going to try and glue these back on as much as I can. Even if I just leave that, that's still a nice looking bark, but I would prefer to have this. So let's see what we can do. We will glue on what we can. There, we have a bowl. It's still thick on the bottom, but this edge up here is probably as thin as I want to get it. So other than a little bit of fine tuning, I'm probably going to leave that. The bark over on this side is gone. There's no way I'll be able to build that back up. That only will work if you're missing a very small piece and you can fit it back in. But I still have bark there. It's just not all the way up to the rim. Like, it's still a very natural bark edge. I'm very pleased with this piece. It's extended up at least an inch. And I have a piece over here that's an inch, inch and a half as well. So I've got good bark coverage. So I'm not going to do any more on that edge other than a finish cut and a bit of sanding. But I'll work at getting the bottom. So I'm less than 1/4 of an inch here for sure, but then when I get down here near the bottom, I've still got over an inch. So I've got quite a bit to go yet there. But that's it for tonight. I'm using my bowl gouge here, and notice the size of the shavings that are coming off, piling up on my hand and flying off to the top. The tool's cutting very, very well. I'm coming down the side, thinning the walls out a little bit, but mostly working on the bottom, removing some of that thickness that I had there. As I did on the outside, I'm using my scraper here just to clean up any tool marks on the bottom of the bowl. The bowl is uniformly thick throughout. It's pretty good. Maybe just a tiny bit right there that I can take out. It's smooth inside. The bottom is as thin as I want it to be. Might be a bit of a high spot right at the very center. I'll work that down. And then there's just a little bit out here on the rim. It's non-continuous that I got to smooth out. But other than that, that inside of that bowl is pretty well done. And I'm very pleased with the grain pattern. If you remember that starburst we saw at the top in the grain, it continues all the way down through. So it's a beautiful piece of wood. Sanding the inside of the bowl with a drill works well, but one thing I do have to be careful of is I come over here that I don't allow the back end of the drill to come in. I've got to keep it out and make sure that I don't touch this on the opposite side, which I did that last go around, and I broke I was very fortunate. I just touched it and I broke off a very small piece of bark, but it was very small, so I was fortunate. Just like I did on the outside of the bowl, I'll apply tung oil, first coat at least, on the lathe. Really look how that brings out the shine and the color in cherry. Another reason for this to be my favorite wood. This is probably one of the most beautiful bowls I've ever done. I'm very pleased with the way it turned out. The bark on the outside has stayed beautiful. It's less than 1/4 of an inch thick, so it's fairly thin. And yeah, it took the finish beautifully. The wood has got wonderful markings. Probably one of the nicest pieces I've done. Let me know in the comments if you agree, but I think I made the right decision. The pattern that we saw on the bottom continued all the way up through the bowl. I was able to maintain a lot of bark, and it's very beautiful and unique looking bark. Again, the grain pattern is phenomenal in this bowl. Here you can see just the amount of bark that was left on. This bark here was very rough on the outside, makes for a really nice texture. And even this bark here, it's not uniform in its thickness, and it displays very nicely. I think that this is probably the prettiest bowl that I've ever turned. Again, leave a comment, let me know what you think.